welcome to the Jewish Peoples Schule. We're meeting here on October 5th, 2024, 4:30 p.m. Eastern. I would say Rosh Hashanah-ish, day after Rosh Hashanah, but we'll be celebrating Rosh Hashanah as well. So I'm going to get started with our intro song, which is about the new year of 1944. This was written, or this was directed by, redirected by Yiddish Glory.
Nacht in a schlechten Cholem, ba Nacht in a schlechten Cholem, a sochen wei wird ihm sein, as wird schön werden Scholem, a sochen wei wird ihm sein, as wird schön werden Scholem. Scholem Frieden auf der Welt, dem Teitschel auf Zeloches, dem Teitschel auf Zeloches. Hitler warf den Hitz und Kält und erkennt uns kuschen in Toches. Hitler warf den Hitz und Kält und erkennt uns kuschen in Toches.
And welcome everyone to the Jewish Peoples Schule. So today, here's what we'll be talking about. We'll do a brief introduction to Rosh Hashanah, which is the Jewish New Year. We'll learn about the creation of Birobidzhan and the Jewish Autonomous Region. This was a state that happened before the Israeli state was founded in 1948. So then we'll watch a movie about the society in the Jewish Autonomous Region and learn about its culture, the Yiddish language that it uses, and its non-Zionist makeup. And we'll learn why it's important to learn and support a Jewish state that is non-Zionist. Rosh Hashanah, it's the new year. It actually ended, I would say it ended yesterday. But, in this transition time, there are 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, which is commonly known as the days of awe. And we'll discuss that. It's a time of repentance and renewal. So just some cultural stuff here. You could say in Yiddish, a Gatz Yor for a good year, which is the greeting, or Shanah Tovah in Hebrew, which is just when you meet someone, just say Shanah Tovah. Really the theme of what we're trying to get here with Birobidzhan, Rosh Hashanah, is out with the old, in with the new. When we looked at doing research for this classes, we looked at not just Birobidzhan, but really Tsarist Russia beforehand, before the Bolshevik Revolution, 1917, and the 1905 Revolution. And during that time of Tsarist Russia, really there was economic exploitation, the old. There were, just egregious amounts of anti-Semitism and violent pogroms that were happening. And there was segregation of the Jews as well at this time, ghettoization of Jewish society. And, a lot of people here, I guess you could say in this diaspora, in American Jews, come from this exploitation. I know, like my family, they fled, I think, in the early 1900s at this time to American soil. And we're really trying to emphasize the new, and that is a renewal for the new year here. We want fraternal brotherhood and sisterhood, not just with Jewish people among ourselves, but other people alongside, whether they be Palestinian, Arab, Russian, any sorts of Slavic people, American. We want to show that when we say things like never again, it's not just for the Jewish people, it's for all people. And we really want to emphasize that at UJPFO. We want to bring economic equality. And hopefully from this, you're going to see how Birobidzhan was definitely way more equal and hospitable, you could say, than what was happening to Jews before 1917 or the founding of Birobidzhan, 1928. Cultural development as well. We're going to watch some videos and you're going to see the massive amount of Yiddish and Jewish culture of Birobidzhan that is still here today on Russian soil, in that region. We'll see some more modern stuff as well. And so when we talk, just some background about the Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashanah is the Jewish New Year, and it occurs on the first and second days of the month of Tishri. That would be in September or early October, like it was this year. That means a lot of our other holidays, like Hanukkah, is going to be a little bit later as well. This begins the 10-day period called Aseret Yomei Teshuvah. Teshuvah is really what it's been shortened to a lot. And those are the 10 days of repentance, also known as the days of awe or Yamin Norim. And this is the culmination into Yom Kippur, and that is the Day of Atonement, which is arguably the most holy day in the Jewish calendar. So, you have the New Year's, but really the big day is Yom Kippur, where a lot of people practicing Judaism will actually fast on this day as well. And so it's customary on Rosh Hashanah to eat apples dipped in honey. And this symbolizes renewal for a good and sweet new year. Also, hearing the shofar, which is just a ram's horn, which was used kind of customary to in the communities to give warning, but it's also used in religious rituals as well. Unfortunately, today we will not hear the shofar. And so now let's go to Russia, but let's talk a little bit about its history and Jews under the Russian Tsar. If you look on the right here, this map will explain that, but this is how the Tsars maintained control in feudal Russia. So in Russia, in the past, the Tsarist government pursued a policy of national oppression and national antagonism. In order to keep the people in subjection, it incited the various nationalities against one another, and it treated the border regions as colonies. It suppressed the national culture of the various nationalities, striving to keep them in a state of ignorance. And so as to be able to exploit them more ruthlessly. The Jews were subject to special restrictions. They were denied the right of domicile in the greatest part of Russia and were confined with the narrow boundaries of the so-called Pale of Settlement. So as you can see here, we could see kind of that Pale, also shortened as the Pale, where the Jewish people were really just forced to live in that region there. And so this Pale of Settlement restrictions were established 1791 from the late 18th to the early 20th centuries. And these laws restricted Jews to live in the western areas of the Russian Empire. And they were removed in 1915. And so what we have here is all of this is coming from a book called Jews in the USSR by Avantel Rohazd. And that was put out by Novosti Press Agency Publishing House. So continuing on, we had this forced placement of Jews in Tsarist Russia. So Jews were forbidden to live in the capital of major cities, and they were allowed to settle only in small towns in several western regions of the Russian Empire. So Jews could not engage in agriculture. A law on percentage quotas limited the right of Jews to education. So the Tsarist autocracy imposed over 700 legal restrictions of every kind on Jews, and only a very few wealthy Jews and converts to Christianity managed to evade these restrictions and bans. And one of the more notorious czars, the last czar, Tsar Nicholas II, was the last czar of Russia before its revolution in 1917, and his government implemented many anti-Semitic laws, and this led to a huge immigration with an E, people leaving Russia, or so, of Jews from Russia. Attacks occurred throughout the existence of the Pale, particularly devastating Russian pogroms targeting hundreds of communities, assaulting thousands of Jews, loss of lives, and causing considerable property damage. And so, and we'll watch a video here in a second. So such a discriminatory policy could not but affect the social composition of Jewish population in Russia, which assumed extreme distortion in the forms of Jews separating themselves from the rest of Russian society. And we'll watch a video to exemplify that. You may have seen it, and there's kind of a hint right there on the right. Concentrated in small towns, the Jewish population was artificially isolated. As time passed, they increasingly withdrew into themselves. And so, as an example, we have Fiddler on the Roof, which was written by Shalom Aleichem, which depicts the Jewish village life, the shetels, really they were forced into. And a little note, when Shalom Aleichem wrote this, he was from I believe, Ukrainian descent, and I believe he immigrated to New York later. But he wrote Fiddler on the Roof actually under the name of Tovah, which is the main character there, Tovah the dairyman, which is just a short stories about him and his struggles and the struggles with his daughters and their love interests. It's a long musical, but it is good, and it's historically pretty revealing as well. So
I'll tell you. I don't know.
But it's a tradition. And because of our traditions, every one of us knows who he is and what God expects him to do.
Who day and night must scramble for a living, feed a wife and children, say his daily prayers, and who has the right, as master of the house, to have the final word at home. The Papa, tradition, the Papa, tradition. Who must know the way to make a proper home, a quiet home, a kosher home? Who must raise a family and run the home, so Papa's free to read the holy book? The mama, tradition, the mama, tradition. At 3 I started Hebrew school, at 10 I learned a trade. I hear they picked a bride for me, I hope she's pretty.
And who does Mama teach? To mend and tend and fix, preparing her to marry whoever Papa picks. The daughters, tradition,
The Papa, son, the daughters, tradition.
So then we're going to go now to the early 20th century here. We have revolution, Lenin, and the Jewish question. During the first Russian Revolution of 1905 and 1907, workers led by the Bolsheviks undertook to defend neighborhoods inhabited by poverty-stricken Jews, and they repeatedly put the anti-Semitic mobsters to flight. At this time, the policy of Jewish nationalists was to detach the Jewish workers from other workers, and we'll talk more about them in the next slide. In examining ways of solving the Jewish question as part of the nationalities question within the framework of the whole country of Russia and as a political and social problem, Lenin, we have him over there, said it could be solved only after the power of the Tsar, the capitalists, and the landlords had been overthrown and a socialist society built. So here he is, quite a popular man at the time. Lenin and the Russian workers fought for the social, economic, political, and national rights of Jewish workers. We're going to talk about some other groups here, Jewish nationalists. Right over here on the right here is some propaganda that the Bund, they were more labor Jewish nationalists in Russia. This is some of their propaganda that they had at the time. So the rise of the revolutionary movement against the Tsar in the early 20th century excited the oppressed Jewish minority who saw it as a chance to overthrow the hated Tsar and his anti-Semitic pogroms, seeking to distract the attention of working people from revolutionary struggle. The ruling circles in the countries of Europe resorted to various means, including the fanning of anti-Semitism. So far as well-to-do Jewish businessmen were concerned, they favored the Zionist notion of a Jewish state in Palestine. So we have this early movement of Zionists that was developing around this time too. This period saw the growing activity of Zionism as an extreme expression of Jewish nationalism, as the ideology and practice of well-to-do of some of Jewish origin. And we have the Bund, which is a labor Jewish nationalist in Russia. And after their fourth Congress in April 1901, it adopted increasingly pro-Zionist positions. And by the way, this was coming from that same book, Jews in the USSR. They believed the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party should be split up on the basis of nationality and that their organization should be recognized as the sole representative of Jewish workers. And so that's Lenin's party at this time. And if you want to read more about that, there's a really good editorial or edited book by Hyman Loomer on it's Lenin and the Jewish question. You can read his responses to the Bund in more detail there. But there was something that Lenin did. And so this is on exposing Jewish nationalists. And responding to the Bundists, Lenin wrote that the Jewish state, which the Zionists declared to be a necessary precondition for solving the Jewish question, could become only a Jewish kingdom with its own police, military, civil servants, and its own government. That is to say, a capitalist state ruled by the Jewish capitalists, either on their own or with the help of Bundists and social Zionist leaders. So in 1914, on Lenin's initiative, the Bolsheviks submitted to the Fourth State Duma at this time of Russia, a bill on national equality. And within that bill, it stated that all laws, temporary regulations, notes to laws, imposing restrictions on Jews in any sphere of social or state life are hereby rescinded. Well, guess what? That bill was never accepted by the Duma, but it played a great role in exposing the great power anti-Semitic policy of Tsarism. So Lenin's bill made it clear that the Jewish question could be radically solved only together with other fundamental issues confronting Russia. We could discuss those another day. So yeah, once again, that comes from Jews in the USSR. Okay, here's another picture of Birobidzhan. We'll get to that in the next section, but let's break for any questions or any comments about all of that content that we just went through. I'll open up the floor to anyone. just raise your hand if anyone has anything to say. I see a lot of new people here, so that's great. And try to keep it to 90 seconds. We do have a lot of content to go through.
Yeah, so, hearing about the Bund stance that, the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party should have been broken up among nationalities makes me think of the Austrian Social Democrats, which did just that. And what it did was essentially it ended up splintering the party as a whole, splitting up into different nationalities. And they even ended up in their unions doing the same thing and scabbing on each other. So it's a great way to divide the working class.
Yeah. Yeah, we really need to have another class on the Bund because, it's not to say that, I think we need to look at it dialectically because there are good things to say about what the Bund did accomplish, but I do appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah, I remember, I guess in one of our classes that a situation was a little bit different in Belarus where, and I guess I don't know if that's in the Pale or not, but supposedly they had, because it was swampy and all that, there was like a nice, what do you call it, connection between the city people, which were mostly Jewish, and the farmers that farmed the what do you call it, the moss thing, I don't know, the perma
Right.
you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I understood that there was like a nice what do you call it, connection between the two. One did the city work and the others did the farm work, and that there was no problem between the two groups in Belarus. I'm just wondering if anybody remembers that, which seemed entirely different than, of course, what.
Yeah, you're right that the Pale of Settlement was at least partly located in Belarus, and it was they were put there because of the harsh farming conditions. So, in order for the population to survive in such a rugged terrain, they had to work together. I don't know if there was there wasn't any mystical bonds between the Belarusian and Jewish people, but through their need to survive their struggle, they grew together and became more amicable than other places where nationalism developed. Yeah, I just wanted to point out, you probably saw in the video from Fiddler on the Roof, and then also some of the posters that were shown. It might have looked like Hebrew writing to you. That was actually Yiddish. Yiddish and Hebrew share a very similar script. Yiddish was when the Romans expelled the Jews to all over Europe. They had to adopt some of the languages, including German. Hebrew mixed with German is where you get the Yiddish language. So it sounds more Germanic, but the writing looks Hebrew. I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, that's correct. You're right. So if you know Hebrew, but you don't know Yiddish, you can read Yiddish, but you won't understand what it is. But a German person could probably hear Yiddish and understand what it says, but wouldn't be able to read it unless they knew how to.
Yeah, I just found it just very interesting on how, the classical, the anti-Semitism of Europe going back was so similar across different European countries. In Germany, for a long time, I mean, for example, in Berlin, I believe there are, don't quote me on this, I believe there are multiple streets, and they're called the Judenstrasse, like literally called Jew Street. And keep in mind, those names stem from hundreds of years back, even before the Nazis. And the reason why that was they're named like that was because of the fact that Jews face very similar persecution in Germany and under both in France and Germany at this point in time. So they were restricted to, ghettos or borough areas. They can only work in certain sectors of the economy, no agriculture, that kind of thing. So they ended up naming quite literally, like naming these streets and these neighborhoods after the Jewish people who inhabited these areas. And I just found that super interesting because of how similar this was across France, Germany, and even Poland and Russia, which are all different countries, obviously, with different customs and different cultures. I just found it really interesting how that power dynamic against the Jewish people was so similar across different cultures. That's all.
All right. Do we have anyone else who wants to speak? If not, we'll go to our next slides, which we'll talk about Birobidzhan. That's fine because we got a lot to do.
Okay. The new life in the Jewish Autonomous Region, or Oblast in Russian. The beginning of the Jewish Autonomous Region. The story of settling of this country is a story of great courage and perseverance. In 1918 through 1922, it was the scene of war against the Japanese forces of intervention and White Guard generals. Here the partisans and Red Army detachments fought bitter battles with the oppressors. In the decisive battle of Volochayevka, the revolutionary forces, ill-equipped, barefoot, and ragged, defeated the well-armed and well-trained regiments of the counter-revolution. This land has now become the scene of joyous and persevering struggle with the forces of nature, a struggle to master the resources of the land, to develop it, to transform it into a flourishing socialist garden. Up to 1928, there existed in this territory just a few small villages and railway stations, tucked away amid the stillness of the forest, lonely settlements in a vast expanse of virgin country. There were a few tiny islets of cultivated land in the endless sea of forest wilderness. And on the right, we have a picture of the Russian Federation, or the land of the Russian Federation, with in red the Jewish Autonomous Region, and Birobidzhan, highlighted in red, is the colloquial name of the Jewish Autonomous Oblast district in Russia. To the west, south, and southeast, it is bordered by the Amur River, the boundary between the former USSR and Manchuria, China. The beginning of the Jewish Autonomous Region. The Bolsheviks saw the need for each national group that existed in the Tsarist prison house of nations to have their own cultural language entity within the new Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Both Stalin and Lenin conceived of the idea of a Jewish Autonomous Republic with set borders. The year 1928, the first year of the first five-year plan period, and the first year of the settlement of Jews in Birobidzhan, marked a great beginning in the history of this region. The first Jewish settlers were confronted with innumerable difficulty: marshes, floods, absence of roads. The tractor drivers were the first to break the stillness of these parts with the rumbling of their tractors relate. We traveled on two tractors through marshes and woods. It was dark and dead, quiet all around us. In the absence of roads, the only way we could travel was by tractor. Its territory extends over an area of 90 million acres. So, to put this into perspective, this is about the size of the country of Belgium, this land. About 50 million acres are covered with forests and brushwood. There are about 19 million acres of natural meadows and prairie land, and another 19 million acres of marshy land requiring melioration. About 2 million acres are under cultivation. Prospecting and investigation went on all the time. The the Academy of Sciences of the USSR and its various institutes sent quite a number of scientific expeditions to study the Jewish Autonomous Region, and each expedition brought new information concerning its inexhaustible mineral resources. The soil covering the rich mineral deposits hidden deep in the earth yielded abundant harvests of wheat, oats, buckwheat, rice, soybeans, and other cereals and leguminous crops. The air was pervaded with the intoxicating perfume of flowers and honey-bearing plants. The tall and succulent grasses provided abundant fodder for horses and cattle. It was to this bountiful land, which had been so much in need of the labor of bold pioneers to explore and develop it, that the first Jewish settlers came in 1928. And this is from the Jewish Autonomous Region by Daniel Bergelson, Foreign Language Publishing House in 1939. And on the right, we can see some of the scenery. It looks like some marshlands on the far right, and then yes, they do have tigers up in the famous Siberian tiger. I think it's one of their symbols on their flag, the Siberian tiger stripes.
Yeah, just quick. This is an interview by Vyacheslav Kostokov, and he's interviewing Lev Shapiro, who was the first secretary of the Communist Party Regional Committee. And so this is called The People and Land of Birobidzhan by Novosti Press, 1979.
Hi, shalom, everyone. Question. Question one. Could you say the Jewish Autonomous Region has reached maturity? It was 45 in May 1979. At that age, it's good to take stock. Do you think that the opportunity afforded the Jews in 1934 of realizing their right to national autonomy has brought the desired results?
I shan't go into details. The main thing is that we have created a national home, which had been the dream of Jews for generations. Over the past 45 years, we have built everything out of nothing: plants, factories, housing, schools, and theaters. Industry began with an Artel manufacturing carts. Today, it is a powerful plant which produces Caterpillar combines exported to many countries of the world. There are now more than 50 industrial enterprises in the region, and Birobidzhan has become the center of light industry in the Soviet Far East. Much is being done to improve the standard of living of the people. Every year, we build an average of 3,500 flats with all modern amenities. The wages of workers and office employees have risen, and they are now above the national average here. We are a long way from Moscow, but we receive programs from the Central Television and Intervision networks clearly. At the moment, we are building a new radio transmission link costing 3 million rubles. This will make it possible for people living in the most distant parts of the region to watch live color transmissions of the 1980 Olympic Games.
What are the sources of friendship among the multinational population of Jewish Autonomous Region?
I was asked the same question recently in America, although it was worded differently. How do you manage to maintain compatibility and good relations among people of 20 different nationalities living within a comparatively small region? I shall not repeat the explanation I gave then, that we do not need to maintain anything artificially. The roots of unity are in the very structure of Soviet society. In the absence of private property and of the division of people into rich and poor, and in the equality of all of the citizens of all nationalities. In brief, there is no food here on which national prejudices can feed. Moreover, the internationalism of the Soviet people follows naturally, I believe, from the Soviet government's national and social policy. People who have found spiritual freedom and have been given a rich territory naturally aspire towards brotherhood and peace rather than towards discord.
And just real quick, I wanted to point everyone's attention to this publication, Birobidzhan Stern, or in English, Birobidzhan Star. It is a weekly news publication printed in Yiddish and Russian to accommodate for all residents of the Jewish Autonomous Oblast.
Although, as you say, there are almost 20 different nationalities living here, it is nevertheless a Jewish autonomy. What is done to preserve and develop Jewish culture?
You have touched on a very interesting question connected with what I was just talking about, the relations between nationalities. In the region, there are indeed favorable conditions in which national Jewish culture and creative endeavors can develop. We have 2 Jewish theaters, our professional and one amateur, which stage works of both classical and modern Jewish writers. There are Jewish dance ensembles and choirs, radio broadcasting in Yiddish, and a daily paper printed in Yiddish. There is, however, one thing I should like to draw your attention to. Neither the Jews, the Russians, or the Ukrainians living in the region want to shut themselves off from other nationalities. Interest in each other's culture is extremely keen. We have, for example, Russian actors belonging to the Jewish theater who act in productions in Yiddish. At the same time, there are many Jewish actors in the Russian theater. It is not unusual to find Russians in the towns and villages who speak perfect Yiddish. One more example, the stage set for the first Jewish opera, which was recently produced in Birobidzhan, A Black Bridal for a White Filly, was designed by the famous Soviet artist Ilya Glazunov, who became especially from Moscow. The concert hall has opened only recently, and I have no doubt that this will have positive results in the development of national music. When walking around the city, you probably noticed in the shops the large number of books in Yiddish. Of course, most of the libraries have both Yiddish and Russian books. The mutual influence and penetration of cultures, now being studied by UNESCO, can be observed in the everyday life of our region. Incidentally, this is promoted by the growing number of mixed marriages. At meetings at the Birobidzhan Literary Club, our Jewish and Russian poets argue about their work. They are not concerned with questions of national discord, because there is no such discord. To summarize, I can say that the Jewish Autonomous Region has become one of the major centers on Jewish culture in the country, a place where the ancient dream of the Jews to have land and to work on it has been realized. The creation of a Jewish Autonomous Region has made it possible for the Jews to have a national home which they can come to at any time or leave, if they like, and go to any part of the Soviet Union. The unhappy memory of the Jewish Pale, created for the Jews by the Tsar's administration, has become a distant recollection. Reading about the Jewish Pale at school, our children frequently ask what it was. We of older generations are happy that they do not know. For our children, the Jewish Autonomous Region is a part of a large single homeland, the Soviet Union.
How do you see the Jewish Autonomous Region at 55 years from now?
Our region is actively involved in the rapid development of the Far East. The Baikal-Amur Main Line, a railway built by the combined efforts of the whole country, opens up new opportunities. By providing those building BAM with agricultural products, we receive valuable help for development. At present, we are building a large servicing plant for heavy-duty vehicles used in the construction. We are expanding our heat and power station and are increasing vegetable production. I cannot say that this development does not create difficult problems at times, a lack of manpower being one of the most pressing. That is why we continue our policy of actively inviting new settlers. We have much space and nature here is rich. Many Jews, nevertheless, have an impression that the Far East is at the end of the earth. And as long as this notion persists, we have to create supplementary incentives for settlers. Consequently, it is easier to obtain comfortable accommodations here than in the European part of the Russian Federation. Wages are higher, and particularly favorable career opportunities are offered to the young. Over the last 3 years, the number of places in kindergartens and schools has increased by 25%. We have made a significant increase in health expenditure. In 1975, the annual outlay was 165,000 rubles. Today, it is 1 million. We look to the future with optimism. The French writer Antoine de Saint-Exupéry writes in his book, Terre des Hommes, love does not consist in gazing at each other, but in looking outward together in the same direction. These words are relevant to our region. We respect each other and look out together with optimism into the future.
Yeah, so, related to that last slide, it said how we viewed, the Jewish Autonomous Oblast 55 years from then. He never predicted what would have happened in the late 80s, early 90s. Unfortunately, since 1989, the beginning of the counter-revolution in Soviet Union, the population dropped from 215,000 to about 115,000 or 150,000 in, I think it was 2021. The population is still steadily declining. That's to say that, I think the important point of this whole class is that unlike in Israel, the Jewish question was settled, but it wasn't settled by nationalism, it was settled by socialism. And we can see that very apparently after the fall of the Soviet Union, when the population started to decline. Immediately after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, life expectancy dropped sharply. It only started to increase in the early 2000s, but now it's back to a decline since 2021.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's incredibly important. And I think we'll see in the video that we'll watch here next, I think the criticism that I would say is not really fair, but they like to bring up, well, it was a Jewish state, but there weren't enough Jews in it. And that was never the purpose of the creation of that state. As we just said in that last slide, the culture was Jewish. The language spoken was Jewish. It was Yiddish. And that was what the efforts were meant to be. If you wanted to go there, there was a safe place for Jews to go to. And that was that oblast, the autonomous region. So, I really don't understand that argument, but you might see that. I'm just trying to address that. Anyone else have any questions? Okay, so we're going to listen to and watch the bridge version of this RT, you want to call it a documentary, on Birobidzhan. Okay.
These men were trying to build themselves a promised land. A land deep in Siberia they'd been told would become the world's first Jewish state. They're the founders of Russia's Jewish Autonomous Region. In the late 1920s, Jews from across the Soviet Union headed to the Russian Far East. They brought their families and set up schools which taught Yiddish and Jewish traditions. It took years of hard labor, but they built themselves a capital city. It's called Birobidzhan. It's taken us about 3 hours, but we finally made it to Birobidzhan's main train station, and it's not difficult to tell that we're in the capital of the Jewish Autonomous Region. If you're based in Moscow, this is some trip. We traveled 6,000 kilometers and crossed 7 time zones to get here, and that was before our final train leg. Once we'd recovered, it was easy to see that we'd come to a place full of character. This is a city that's especially proud of its immigrant past. There are around 200,000 people in the region, and despite the fact that only 2% of them are actually Jewish, I was about to find out that old or young, all of Birobidzhan shares a love of Jewish culture, and especially music. Monuments celebrating the arts are everywhere, and the sculptors haven't left any doubt about their Jewish connection. Authors are also held in high regard, and right in the centre of the city, on a street that bears his name, there's a statue to a particularly important cultural icon.
This is the only area in Russia where they still speak and study Yiddish, and where this man's work is still an inspiration. That's Shalom Aleichem, probably the most famous Yiddish writer of them all, and it was from his poetry that they got the film and the musical Fiddler on the Roof.
And music is at the heart of a cultural programme organised by the Jewish Community Centre. Alongside its charity work for the city's poor, it puts on shows and sponsors Jewish singing groups. And luckily, I just happened to be passing at the right time to check out the rehearsals of one of Birobidzhan's most popular quartets, and they kindly invited me to watch them at work. The group are called All Together, and they compete in folk music competitions all over the country. They sing plenty of Russian classics, but their favourite songs are inspired by their hometown. Much of their repertoire is written and conducted by musical director Naum Levant, a man who draws heavily on his Jewish roots.
Jewish melodies differ from other melodies because of the fate of Jewish people. All the melodies are a little sad, a little joyful, a little ironic, because the Jewish people are the most ironic people. And this makes Jewish music different.
It's a tradition that's fully embraced by members of the Community Centre's Golden Age Club, who are never shy about striking up a tune or two, especially if they're expecting visitors.
Alongside its charity work, the organisation also acts as a cultural and social centre for many people in Birobidzhan, and it sounds like there might just be a party going on.
These ladies come here once a week to chat, share needlework tips, and occasionally sing for the odd visiting journalist. The meetings are all good fun, but they've also become a crucial part of their Jewish identity.
Shalom.
Shalom. This place seems very special for you all. Can you tell me how much of a difference being part of the community centre has made to you?
We'd forgotten what Jewish meant, it was killed in us. But since we started attending this club, we've become familiar with the traditions. We've started communicating. It's changed our lives.
The weather is good. Tomorrow we'll bring the concrete blocks, and I want you to put them here, cover them with earth.
Just as Birobidzhan's community centre is changing the lives of the town's Jews, one man is helping change the face of the city itself. Josef Brenner is one of its biggest housing developers. He's lived in Birobidzhan all his life and says he'd never leave. And his employees are equally passionate. One even gave up a life in sunny Israel because he missed his favourite pastime.
My children had left and I followed them. I came back in a year because there was no winter fishing. Fishing is a good rest for me. Then I came back again. I feel it at home here and like a guest there.
For Josef, nowhere else will do. Aside from being a property tycoon, he's also a serious Birobidzhan historian, and he offered to give me a tour. Josef has written a book about the city and was more than happy to point out the main sites and fill me in on their stories. He's got more than half a century of memories, and before long, we ended up in his very favourite spot, the place where he first heard the Yiddish language.
This square was the most interesting place in Birobidzhan in the 1950s. There were old men and women gathering here. The old women spoke Yiddish, and I started to understand it. And I think this is from here where my Yiddish proceeds.
Yosef's book took him more than 10 years to write. It tells the story of Birobidzhan from its earliest days and has dozens of tales from his youth, memories of times gone by, and period photographs. There's a picture of the main high street from the 1930s, and even one of the very road next to the square we were standing on.
There have been a few changes on this street since the old days of Birobidzhan. The traffic comes the other way now, and that building certainly wasn't there before. But some things have stayed the same. That building was a shop 70 years ago, and it still is today.
Another Birobidzhan symbol that survived the decades is the city's local newspaper, the Birobidzhan Stern. It still has a section in Yiddish and a strong focus on Jewish issues. Vladislav Sapp has been its cartoonist for 12 years. Although he does cover serious news stories, his favourite work has always been drawing famous Jewish characters and illustrating Jewish anecdotes. He's a bit of an expert on Yiddish humour, and he's even co-authored a rather special paperback. It was a big seller in China, but that meant it wasn't exactly an easy read for me.
Well, we have a slightly unusual situation of a book of Jewish humour that's printed in Chinese that we've had to translate into English, so I hope this works. A Jewish grandma and her grandson are walking on the beach. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a huge wave comes along, sweeps the little boy out to sea. Grandma falls to her knees, prays to God, "Please, please, bring back my grandson. I'll do anything, anything at all if you'll just bring him back." Waits a few seconds. Then suddenly another wave comes along, deposits the little boy back on the beach, wet, but otherwise unharmed. Grandma looks at the little boy, looks back to the sky, and says, "What? You couldn't bring back his hat too?"
Shalom Aleichem. Aleichem Shalom.
Probably best to leave the Jewish comedy to the experts. But I did want to get to grips with the city's native language. And what better place to do it than a Yiddish course at the local university? But before anything else, I needed to learn how to introduce myself.
James, repeat after me, please.
Ich bin James.
Ich bin von
England.
Shalom Aleichem. Ich bin James. Ich bin von England.
Okay, very good.
There are virtually no native Yiddish speakers left in Birobidzhan, but this college is helping to train a new generation. The course has been going since the fall of the Soviet Union, and it's still popular. Students spend 5 years here, and many have gone on to become teachers themselves or to find work in the region.
Thank you. See you tomorrow.
It doesn't look like Yiddish is ever going to become my second language, but that's a distinct possibility for the children who go to Birobidzhan's Sunday school. Every week they have a program of lessons including Jewish history and traditions, although they don't exactly have a traditional warm-up. Once they get to class, though, it's straight down to business. The teachers here are all passionate about Yiddish, and they volunteer at the school for free. They hope that these early tutorials will encourage the children and give the language the chance of a real future. Today's subject is the Yiddish alphabet, and the children take it in turns to write and repeat the various letters. But language training is only one part of the curriculum, and the children seem more than happy to give up part of their weekend for extra lessons.
There'll be a lot of help if I choose to become an interpreter or decide to go to Israel for studies.
We learn about ways to celebrate our holidays and about food for each festivity. We also read prayers sometimes.
But it's not all work and no play for Birobidzhan's young people. Matvey performs in a Jewish singing group. He just also happens to be a big fan of the French free-running sport parkour.
Now, singing the Jewish classics is all well and good, but when he's not in the concert hall, Matvey does like to indulge in something a little less traditional.
I'm not actually Jewish, but as they say here in this region, you might not be Jewish, but you must live the Jewish way. It's a joke, of course, but it struck root. I attended a Jewish school where we were taught Yiddish and Hebrew, and we were even able to mix with some guys from Israel.
Okay, a little abrupt ending there. I think it just panned towards a rave or something that was happening. But let's start with a discussion. And yeah, I think what that guy said there at the very end, I thought was crucial. As a joke, though the truth is said in jest, you must learn the Jewish way. And that's really what I hope that, which I think the video kind of exemplifies, is it is a Jewish state where Yiddish and Hebrew are being taught regularly. That doesn't, you can't say that for the US, but and also that the culture was very much, you heard the music and what was happening, very much Jewish in Yiddish. And I think that's important because as we also see, Hebrew is kind of taking over as a more common language spoken over Yiddish, and the amount of literature of Yiddish must be preserved, in my opinion. Those translators are being lost, and we're leaving it to the whims of our AI overlords to do that. It's not going to be great. So, you know, what they are doing, in my opinion, is crucial, I think, for the legacy of the Jewish people. But do we have any other discussion or comments about any of that?
It very much exemplifies the need for institutional support for these kinds of cultures, these kinds of languages that, you know, demographically might not be as prominent, you know, as was said before in this class, you know, like just it was the Jewish Autonomous Region, even though obviously not everybody there and not even a majority were Jews in that area. And because demographics change and can change greatly over the course of even just decades, it is still crucial, as you said, that you know, even though, you know, there were virtually no native speakers left of Yiddish, you know, you have people who have little to do with Judaism who would still learn it. And it's super important because not only is it a continuity of history, but it is also a continuity of a culture that has a unique perspective, and it has you know, a lot of how do I say, it can give a lot of insight for the historical features of that time and of that land. That's all I gotta say.
No, well said. Thanks a lot for that addition. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, you know, as it was mentioned, the Jewish population is a very small percentage. And I was curious as to what other ethnic groups or entities have settled there.
As far as other minority groups besides Russian backgrounds, I mean, because the majority are make the wealth of the population from a Russian ethnic background.
Right.
I have a book. I can look at it to find that breakdown. But remember, it's right next to China too, which I thought was interesting. They even had that Chinese book, that joke book in Chinese.
Right.
And so there would be I would imagine some people from that background of Chinese, or let me get back to you on that. I can pull it up and.
No problem. Yeah, I was just more curious what makes up, but anybody can look, I guess, up those demographics. So, and the other thing, are they still now trying to promote settlers to come into that region? I mean, is 2024, do they still advertise, and who do they advertise to?
when we went on their website, lots of tourism though that I saw on there.
All right. They're probably using tourism to try and get people in. And yeah, and I am assuming that you better learn Yiddish pretty quickly if you're there, if you want to stay there, correct?
It seems like it's almost like a unspoken rule. This is what I take, but I haven't lived there, but that's what I got the impression of.
No problem. Yeah. I'm just surprised that it isn't more interesting to a lot more settlers. Just as you said, it's right next to China. I mean, there's so much there. But
and to this day, yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Were you finished?
Go ahead.
But to this day, that newspaper in Yiddish is still being printed. So it is still, they're still pushing the language of Yiddish, which I think is crucial.
Yeah, there is definitely a push to resettle the land, to repopulate it after the last few decades. I don't know if people saw in some of the slides we had pictures from what was called the Far East Street exhibition at the Far East Economic Forum in Vladivostok, Russia. It's even further east, but they had a festival there back in, I think it was September, and the Jewish Autonomous Oblast had its own pavilion where it exhibited its culture in the pursuit of getting people to want to move there. So there are drives, and hopefully they will pick up.
Yeah. And I could only imagine for the bountiful amount of natural resources that you would want people living there, but thanks for those additions.
Yes, okay, I'm unmuted now. Thank you. I want to mention that Birobidzhan really represents the history of Jews in Europe. Basically, Ashkenaz Jewish background. Yiddish is part of that. Israeli society is totally different. Totally different. It is not really Jewish. It is Israeli, which is different. It has different foods, different culture, different tradition, much more Middle Eastern connected, whereas you didn't have that in Europe. So I think there's a really, that's why people would go back and forth. And the guy mentioned he went back because that it's a different culture entirely. But it's interesting that when people left there, they left the Soviet Union. It was right across the whole boundary. Large numbers of Jews who lived in Russia in the Soviet Union migrated to the United States. A lot of them in Brooklyn, Brighton Beach, and a lot of them in Staten Island, right here, near the water. So it's not just Birobidzhan that lost people. It was right across the border, every area. Remember, life was very bad in the first 10 years of Yeltsin, economically. It was very bad. And so a lot of people left. Thank you.
Yeah, and just something to think about. I think we should look into this is given Netanyahu's war on Gaza and now Lebanon. I know a lot of Israelis are leaving that country, and I know a lot of them speak Russian and Yiddish. It'd be curious to see how the populations from there move to other places like Birobidzhan, but that's maybe for another day.
And whatever religion you are, if you're in Birobidzhan on a Friday or Saturday night, there's only one place that everyone mixes. This is the city's best nightclub, and you need to get here early to pick out the perfect place on the dance floor. I wasn't prepared to take Matvey on in a dance-off, but then he mentioned the club had a pool hall. He did say he was a bit of an expert. but I was feeling pretty confident.
So, and that's our key. That's
Now
cool.
this, I reckon I can beat you.
Unfortunately, it turned out that he wanted to play Russian billiards. And that's a whole different ball game. I'm sure those pockets are way too small.
Come on. Sometimes we have a Jewish party here. There are DJs from Israel.
For most of the next hour, I was standing around watching Matvey clear up. And my best of 3 challenge quickly became a best of 5. But while he was taking me to the cleaners, I learned that the Jewish influence in Birobidzhan even extends inside these walls.
There are lots of special parties here, like birthdays, New Year's celebrations, and of course Jewish parties, as you'd expect in this region. We invite DJs from Israel, Jewish music is played, and we celebrate all the Jewish feasts.
And even I had something to celebrate, in the end. I'd seen a lot of the secular side of Jewish life in Birobidzhan, but many of the city's Jews are also rediscovering their relationship with God. During the atheist times of the Soviet Union, many stopped their religious rituals altogether. But since this new synagogue was built in 2004, more and more have been returning to the fold. It was opened to mark the 70th anniversary of the Jewish Autonomous Region, and the city's religious Jews now have a beautiful place to pray and a devout rabbi to follow. Most of the men here are elderly, but young faces are also making an appearance. 10 years ago, Ilya emigrated to Israel and was so moved by the experience that he risked his life for the country.
I was attending a yeshiva, a religious school. Later, I was in the army for 3 years and directly participated in all conflicts. After the army, I came back here to live as before.
But there are literally thousands of Birobidzhan Jews who have stayed in Israel. After the collapse of communism, many took the chance to emigrate for the first time and headed straight for their spiritual home. But even if you take the lady out of the city, you can't take the city out of the lady. Faina is a concert pianist, and this is one of her favorite pieces, a score composed as a tribute to the founders of Birobidzhan.
There is certainly something special in being from Birobidzhan. I even have a card which says, "Twice a Jew of the Soviet Union." I bought it in Moscow on Arbut Street 6 years ago. It means that in addition to just being a Jew, you were born in Birobidzhan. This is special.
It's a feeling shared by other expats from the Jewish Autonomous Region. David Wasserman used to be Birobidzhan's deputy mayor before he left the city 9 years ago. His friend Vladimir Rottenstein was the head of a local TV station and arrived at the same time. Now they're both planning to write a detailed history of the city. But in the meantime, they both missed their hometowns so much that they set up an organization to keep everyone who'd emigrated in touch with each other. Now their group meets several times a year and organizes special trips.
We only have about 10 minutes left. I want to break for discussion, if that's okay. Yeah, I thought that was good. Artsy, it's more of a contemporary thing. I wouldn't agree with everything it said, but I think it had a really good view of how at least the Birobidzhan society in the autonomous region, how they live today. So with that said, let's break for a last round of questions if anyone has anything to add.
Sorry, hello. Hi. I just was telling when we were watching the videos that I was I would have never thought ever there would be a Jewish population in Russia. I would have always thought Israel, 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 because I never learned this like in any classes growing up in high school and in college, and it's just not presented enough. And I think it's was really interesting. So I'm glad I stuck around.
Me too. I'm really fortunate. And there you go. Yeah, I think that's a win for us. But go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to, point out it's, it was probably pretty obvious that RT is operating in a post-socialist society. You could see it in the way they explained certain things. They talked about how, practice of Judaism is on the incline now that the Soviet Union is no longer in existence. It sort of made it seem like they were trying to say that that religion was was not accepted in the Soviet Union, but that is not true. There were synagogues built in the Jewish Autonomous Region during the Soviet Union. They were, in general, the population in Soviet Union was more secularized, and that's because, as a Jewish philosopher Karl Marx said, religion is the sigh of relief for the working class. Under socialism, they no longer had to focus on what would happen after they died. They focused on their life in the now. So I just wanted to point that out.
Hi, everyone. I want to congratulate you on an excellent program. It was very interesting. So I just wanted to add one thing. Prior to the revolution in World War I, actually, there were more than just, Bolsheviks and Bundists. There were also Zionists among the Jewish population prior to World War I. And of course, they would not have been in the they would not have been in the Social Democratic Party, probably, like the Bundists were in the Mensheviks, and then you had the Jewish members of the Bolsheviks who were more assimilationist. The Bundists wanted to stay in Russia. They wanted to build a Jewish state. So Stalin's project was actually closer to what the Bundists, who were the majority anyway, in the Social Democratic Party among Jews, it was closer to what they actually wanted. The Zionists, on the other hand, always wanted to leave and go to Palestine. You had socialist Zionists and you had labor Zionists, and they would not have. They were the ones who wanted to go to Palestine, really, not the Bundists. Really, the Bundists wanted to stay and build socialism in a socialist Russia after the revolution. And many of the Mensheviks actually did end up joining the party in the long run anyway, because they felt that the party was representing their long-term interests. So I just wanted to add that to the discussion.
No, we really appreciate it. And we definitely need to have you again. We're going to try to end this quickly because I want to get to their national anthem, which is good.
Yeah, I'll make it quick. Thank you for putting this on. If it wasn't for the work, all the work that you put in, and it was great. It was at the right time and everything else. I also, when I was growing up, never heard of Birobidzhan. Never heard of it. It's amazing how in the school they only tell us what they want you to know. They don't tell you what you need to know. They only tell you what they want you to know. So you really don't get an education. I'm a former teacher, 32 years in the school system, and I could vouch for that. So yeah, it's good that we had this tonight. It was very informative. I hope it goes on YouTube. Birobidzhan is not the past. Mark my words, it's the future. It's going to continue. And the word will get out little by little that you could have a Jewish homeland without oppressing your neighbors. That's the real word, oppressing your neighbors. And in Palestine, that's what has happened. But that's all I want to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah.
На востоке России, великой страны, мы построили область, которой верны. У Бироbidzhana в таежном краю мы нашли свое счастье и долю свою. Еврейская область славная, наш надежный приветливый дом. Ты судьба моя, ты земля моя, здесь единой семьей мы живем. Где стоят часовыми Хинган и Даур, и до самого устья Тунгусской реки величаво несет свои воды Амур под еврейский напев и под русский мотив. Еврейская область славная, наш надежный приветливый дом. Ты судьба моя, ты земля моя, здесь единой семьей мы живем. Над Бирой развивается с радугой флаг. Мы стремимся вперед, каждый выверен шаг тех, кто здесь начинал. Сохраним имена, славься область родная во все времена. Еврейская область славная, наш надежный приветливый дом. Ты судьба моя, ты земля моя, здесь единой семьей мы живем.
Thanks everyone for joining us. We'll see you next time. Shanah Tovah, happy holidays, and we'll see you. Thanks.
Thank you. Good night.